Hello and welcome everyone to our medical roundtable presentation. My name is Amanda and I'll be managing today's webinar. Today we're proud to host Gene Therapy Has Arrived, What Does the Future Hold? Presented by our CEO, our CMO, and our Executive VP of Strategy and Innovation. INTERLINK's premier medical roundtable series are specifically designed for clients actively working with INTERLINK on transplant or specialty cases. Our intention is to host one premier discussion every quarter, covering topics that are either very timely, like cell and gene therapies, or that have been requested on an ongoing basis, like contracting. I encourage you to contact your account managers here at INTERLINK anytime with topics that you'd like to see us cover. As always, our goal here is to present the most current and unbiased information available, and we greatly appreciate both your ongoing support and your input. Before we begin, I'd just like to go over our webinar program. You should be seeing two screens. One is your viewing screen where you should see today's presentation slides. The other screen is your control panel. Copies of today's presentation slides are available to download now through the control panel. You can also type in any questions that you have under the questions section, and we're going to allow time at the end of the presentation to cover as many of these questions as possible. Approximately an hour after the end of the presentation, all attendees will receive an email with a link to a short survey. Please fill out this survey if you wish to receive the associated CCM credit for attendance. Today, we will be hosting a talk on gene therapy, a rapidly evolving area of healthcare. Gene therapy efforts began in 1972, but as you may imagine, it required recent technology to advance from theory to concept to actual products. The first FDA approval was in 2017, and there have been a handful of additional approvals since then. The first FDA approval, at present, there are nearly 600 clinical trials for various conditions, and the focus for now is on disease states resulting from a single mutation on a single gene. The FDA expects approvals to accelerate over the next 3 years, so it's a great time for discussion about this area of medicine. Today, we have invited our own industry experts to help us understand the current and future landscape of gene therapy, including clinical and reimbursement aspects, to help our clients best manage and contain costs for these complex cases. John Van Dyke is INTERLINK's Chief Executive Officer and has been instrumental in the evolution of INTERLINK's products and services. Dr. Bronster is INTERLINK's Chief Medical Officer, overseeing our cancer care program. As a former liver transplant surgeon, Dr. Bronster is a valued resource for our transplant program as well. We're also happy to have Chris Atkins here. Chris was key in the development of our cancer care program and is working to enhance our footprint within the gene and cellular therapy space. Welcome our panel of experts, and I'll hand it over to Dr. Bronster.
Thank you, Amanda, and I want to welcome everyone who is elected to share this hour with us. Can I have the first slide, please, Amanda? So the history of gene therapy, very quickly. So many scientists, many clinicians consider the history of gene therapy or the evolution of gene therapy one of the biggest medical success stories of the 21st century. The original publication discussing the potential role of gene therapy to treat genetic diseases was published in Science magazine in 1972. How almost immediately upon publication, questions arose, and different components of the medical community stated that, quote, for the foreseeable future, we oppose any further attempts at gene therapy in human patients because, one, our understanding of such basic processes as gene regulation and genetic recombination in human cells is inadequate. Our understanding of the details of the actual relationship between the molecular defect, the identified genetic defect, and the disease state is rudimentary. And third, maybe most importantly, we have no information on either the short-range and long-term effects of gene therapy. Well, 18 years later, in 1990, the first gene therapy trial was launched in a child with SCID, severe combined immunodeficiency disease, the so-called bubble boy disease. This is a disease where patients, children, really have no T-cell immunity whatsoever. They're missing an enzyme called adenosine deaminase, and their life expectancy is very short. They die of overwhelming sepsis. And even to keep these patients alive for a few decades, they really completely isolated these children. Well, the first attempt at gene therapy in a young child with SCID was actually successful, though in fact subsequent gene therapies in other children with SCID failed. But this first success really ignited interest in this entire field. And over the next 10 years, 3,000 patients, almost 400 trials received a gene transfer. Though interestingly, the physician who was involved in the very first case, actually his career was curtailed because he had never gone through an IRB process. There was a lot of opposition to the way in which he had conducted the initial, albeit successful, gene therapy case. Well, while the initial experiment was successful, progress was really slow, very few positive outcomes. And then 10 years after the first successful case, the entire field of gene therapy was almost completely derailed in 1999, where at the University of Pennsylvania, which was the leader in gene therapy at that time, there was a death of a young patient from complications of the therapy. In fact, that patient died of overwhelming viral infection, and I'll explain why that happened in just a minute. Following this death, the FDA suspended both the program, the entire program at the University of Pennsylvania, and also launched investigations into all 69 ongoing gene therapy trials across the country. Next slide, please. So what actually is gene therapy? It's actually many different things, all lumped under one umbrella. Well, gene therapy products are biological products, which in fact are regulated, as are other drugs, by the FDA. Gene therapy seeks to modify or manipulate the expression of a gene or to alter the biological properties of living cells for therapeutic use. And simply put, gene therapy is a technique that modifies a person's gene to treat or cure disease. So the question comes up, what is a gene? At the most basic level, well, genes are a series of nucleotides you find on a chromosome, which can be read and translated into RNA. Different genes are of different lengths, but fundamentally, a gene is capable of being read and creating RNA. So gene therapies work by several different mechanisms that can replace a disease-causing gene with a healthy copy of the gene. It can inactivate or delete a disease-causing gene, or it can absolutely introduce a new or modified gene into the body to help treat a disease. Next slide, please. So there are many challenges in delivering gene therapy. Once gene therapy has been administered, it is difficult or impossible to stop treatment because this gene has been incorporated into the DNA of the patient you've treated. It is still too early to know the long-term effects of gene therapy or how long gene therapy will last. Long-term safety risks are still ill-defined, and gene therapy usually requires a viral vector to introduce a copy of the new gene. And these modified viruses, while supposedly inactivated, have been known to cause cancer and other diseases. In fact, in that child with SCID, the viral vector that was used was an adenovirus. Adenoviruses can get into the nucleus and can carry along with it a gene that can potentially be incorporated into the DNA. The problem with using an adenovirus as a vector is adenovirus unleashes oncogenes and can cause cancer or can cause overwhelming viral sepsis. And in fact, it turned out that the adenovirus was a very ill-suited viral vector. There are new viral vectors that are being used. The most common is called an AAV virus, an adeno-associated virus, but herpes simplex is used, lentivirus is used. Many different viral vectors are used. So novel approaches to delivering gene products or modifying the host DNA are continually being introduced, making it ever more difficult to assess long-term results and complications. In fact, the newest approach to gene therapy using CRISPR technology which is technology developed primarily at MIT that can actually edit DNA, right, and can modify the existing genes, has just been introduced and into clinical practice, and it is anticipated that the FDA is going to approve the first gene therapy utilizing CRISPR technology in the next 4 weeks. That's how fast this field is moving, how many different novel approaches are being developed to try to manipulate patients' genes to treat disease states. Next slide, please. I put this up here just so people understand the enormous commercial interest in both cell and gene therapy, and there is an overlook or there's a connection between cell and gene therapy. For instance, CAR T treatment both has components of cell therapy in it and gene therapy in. But you can see how many different institutions and how many different large pharma are interested in this technology, indicating how large the potential opportunity is. Next slide, please. So the question that comes up for many people on this call, I think, is why is gene therapy so expensive? Well, available gene therapies treat rare diseases, and potential patients can number in the thousands or fewer. Private companies often spend hundreds of millions and maybe even billions of dollars shepherding a therapy through the research and approval process, and the companies justify the cost as they claim they must set, using their own phrases, eye-watering prices if they aim to profit from the products that will be sold to few customers. One of the approved gene therapy products, in fact, has as few as 80 potential customers in the entire United States. Now, the cost attached to gene therapy means that these products are often too expensive for patients who could actually benefit from these products. And we recognize that gene therapies really are the most expensive drugs in the world, with Hemgenix, a gene therapy product to treat hemophilia B, costing $3.5 million per patient. Alvitus, a gene treatment for muscular dystrophy, costs $3.2 million per patient, and Skysona, for this very rare cerebral adrenoleukodystrophy with only a handful of patients in the whole country, costing $3 million per patient. I want to point out that the FDA is committed to introducing gene therapy as quickly as possible, and they realize that gene therapy has the potential to address patients who have diseases that have completely unmet clinical need, and the FDA has used an accelerated process to approve some of these gene therapy products, most importantly, Alvitus. So the FDA approved in the spring of this year Alvitus based upon some secondary outcomes, and patients have received this gene. Well, it turned out just last week, the trial for muscular dystrophy was completed, and this product, the $3.2 million product, missed its primary endpoints. So the question now arises, what is the FDA going to do? Based upon an accelerated process, something that they developed primarily to treat COVID vaccines, they approved this drug. It didn't meet an endpoint. Now, there are all kinds of very animated patient groups who have boys with muscular dystrophy who are insisting that this gene therapy product remain available to their children. But by all standard pathways, this drug should be withdrawn from the market. We're going to have to see what happens going forward. Next slide, please. This is just a list. The next two slides are just a list of all the gene products that have been approved by the FDA through the third quarter of last year. I'm not going to give you an actual number of gene therapies that have been approved because that number literally is changing now month to month. Next slide, please. And next slide. So these are the products approved through last year at this time. Next slide. But there's a rapidly changing gene therapy landscape. So 6 new therapies in cell and gene therapy were approved in the second quarter of 2023, and 2 of these 6 were in the gene therapy arena: Elvitus for the Duchenne's and Vyjuvek for epidermolysis bullosa. And these 2 gene therapies are the first to be approved for their respective indications. Now, the FDA appears poised to approve first medical therapies that use gene editing, or to approve the first medical therapy that uses gene editing. As I mentioned, that's CRISPR technology to treat a disease. A committee of the independent FDA advisors just this past Tuesday praised the treatment, which uses CRISPR technology to treat sickle cell disease, a devastating blood order. Now, I mentioned cerebral adrenoleukodystrophy, which is one of the gene therapies available, treats a handful of patients. There are 100,000 patients in America with sickle cell disease. So you understand how quickly the potential market for gene therapy can expand. Now, it's only thought that 20,000 of the 100,000 patients with sickle cell, patients who have frequent sickle cell crises or what are called veno-occlusive disease, would be suitable for gene therapy treatment. But again, we see very quickly how gene therapy expands from a handful of patients to tens of thousands and potentially millions of patients being eligible to be treated with gene therapy. And in fact, the FDA is going to release their decision on this novel treatment for sickle cell disease using CRISPR technology the first or second week of December. This product using CRISPR technology is called Exicel. Next slide, please. Now, there are various routes of administration of gene therapy. It can be administered topically. Vyjuvek, which uses a herpes simplex viral vector, is used and topically applied. It's a cream that's compounded in a doctor's office to treat epidermolysis bullosa. It can be given intraocularly, Luxturna. You inject into the retina directly to treat inherited retinal dystrophy. This is a disease which, before the introduction of Luxturna, invariably led to a total blindness in patients. It can be given intrathecally as a spinal tap. That drug is called Spinraza, and this is used to treat spinal muscular atrophy in both children and adults. However, most of gene therapy is given intravenously through a peripheral IV line, but even when given intravenously, these cells are even given in what's called an in vivo or an ex vivo way. In vivo treatment means a foreign product is just injected through a peripheral line, like the Hemgenix product for hemophilia B, into a patient without any preparation. But the ex vivo space occurs when patients undergo plasmapheresis, their stem cells are extracted. Those stem cells are then manipulated and grown externally. Patients, before these stem cells are reinfused, then receive chemotherapy to ablate their bone marrow. And then these ex vivo genetically manipulated stem cells are reinfused back into the patient, very similarly to a bone marrow transplant. So when patients get ex vivo genetic manipulations, they have to undergo plasmapheresis. Those stem cells are genetically manipulated, grown up, then reinfused, and those patients then spend approximately 4 to 6 weeks in the hospital. So these patients who receive ex vivo gene products, the cost is really enormous because these products cost multiple millions of dollars. Then you have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of hospital costs attached to this. So ex vivo genetic manipulation of cells and subsequent reinfusion can result in prolonged hospitalizations with complications and hospital costs like those seen with bone marrow transplants. Next slide, please. The point I'm trying to make here is that rare or orphan diseases really overall aren't so rare. In the United States, any disease affecting fewer than 200,000 people is considered rare. However, there are more than 7,000 rare diseases, and more than 250 new conditions are described in the literature annually. 70% of these rare diseases are genetic diseases that are potentially treatable through gene therapy. In total, almost 10% of Americans, 25 to 30 million Americans, and 350 million people worldwide are affected by what we call a rare or overwhelmingly a genetically linked disease. And many of these diseases, though not all, are caused by a single point mutation, and again, are potentially amenable to a gene therapy solution. So while right now there are hundreds of patients potentially suitable to receive gene therapy, moving forward, there are tens of thousands, even potentially millions of patients who might benefit from gene therapy. Next slide, please. And again, as Amanda said, there are 600 to over 1,000 ongoing cell and gene therapies currently active in the United States that are enrolling. And in general, we see growth year over year over year. 2021, we didn't see growth because of COVID, but the number of trials continues to increase in 22 and in 23. So there probably are over 1,000 gene therapy trials now ongoing at different institutions in America. Next slide, please. Now, as Amanda mentioned, historically, I'm an abdominal transplant surgeon, so I want to mention what I find almost most exciting as we look at the combination of both cell and gene therapy and where we might benefit the most patient. That's in xenotransplantation, which I think is the most advanced interface of cellular and gene therapy. Xenotransplantation today means manipulating pig organs and then transplanting people with medical needs with this manipulated pig organ. Well, just looking at the kidney environment, there are 140,000 patients right now on the renal transplant waiting list in America. 5,000 of these patients die every year waiting, and another 4,000 patients annually are removed because waiting for a kidney transplant, they become too sick. And some of the patients are waiting for more than 10 years on the cadaveric waiting list for a transplant. In the United States last year, or in 21, we did a little over 25,000 renal transplants. That's the most kidney transplants we've ever done. But again, that's only a tiny percentage. That's less than 20% of the patients who are on the waiting list. And at 1 to 5 years post-transplant, transplant recipients, kidney transplant recipients, were 60% more likely to survive than a comparably matched cohort of those patients remaining on dialysis. So when you have a successful kidney transplant, not only do you get a patient off of dialysis, but you extend their life expectancy. Now, it's also important to understand that maintaining a patient on dialysis is substantially more expensive after year 1 than a successful renal transplant. Next slide, please. So again, xenotransplantation does represent the most advanced interface of cellular and gene therapy. Recent attempts at xenotransplantation, primarily at NYU, but at other institutions as well, have involved xenotransplants of both heart and kidney organs. These manipulated pig organs are being created in proprietary settings, with several companies competing to create suitable xenografts using different approaches to genetic manipulation. However, some of the manipulations involve either editing using CRISPR technology or adding as many as 10 genes to these organs to prevent either hyperacute or acute rejection. So again, right now in gene therapy, we're looking at single point mutations. I mentioned this just to understand that we could easily get beyond that and look at diseases with complex mutations potentially. Now, to date, there are no long-term survivors, but recent experience is encouraging, and there are ongoing trials with IRB oversight at actually many institutions in the United States and abroad. And while xenotransplantation to date has been the unsuccessful holy grail of transplantation, the future does look promising and builds off the success of current cell and gene therapy programs. So I I mentioned xenotransplantation just so you get a feel for how quickly and how far gene and cell therapy can be advanced. I hope you understand from the few slides I've shared with you how complex this field is and how really to manage the patients who will benefit from this novel treatment, you really have to have a relationship with an organization that stays absolutely contemporary. As I say, the whole field may change in 2 weeks when the first CRISPR manipulated gene therapy is approved. So right now, where there are 16 or 20 gene products, we really think in the next 3 to 5 years, there are going to be 40 or 50 gene products in the market and more going forward, which is my opportunity to turn this over to John Van Dyke and then Chris Atkins to discuss Interlink's ongoing involvement in this field of gene and cell therapy.
Well, thank you, Oscar, and great summary about gene and cell therapies. Things are moving so quickly that it's hard to keep up, and that's one of the things that Interlink is very committed to. And by re-engaging with Chris Atkins to develop a program to communicate outwards to our clients and really develop strategies, it's really important to Interlink, and I appreciate everybody coming today. This is a premier level presentation. It's only offered to a small group of people that associate with Interlink, so we appreciate your business and appreciate you listening. Now I'm going to shift gears here a little bit, and what I'm going to talk about is what is known about the cost. What are the pricing methodologies, contract strategies, payments, warranties, authorization processes, and benefit plan language. So I'm taking a different tack than Oscar. And what I'm going to do is there's not a lot of communication going on amongst the companies that are positioning themselves to be players in this cell and gene and cell therapy field. So I'm going to use what Interlink does, and sometimes I'll say, well, I think other people might be doing the same. So I don't mean to oversell Interlink here. It's just, this is what we have to work with. So how about next slide? Gene and cell therapy. Interlink has been involved in this from the very beginning. We had a medical director that was associated with Interlink for probably 12, 15 years, Dr. Potts. And Dr. Ronald Potts came to the management team and said he would like to join the MIT NewDigs program about gene and cell therapy. It was 2016, 17, 18, somewhere in there where he started doing this. And what he thought would be an advantage of him joining this and start talking about gene and cell therapy high cost is that maybe we could influence from the very beginning. And so we did allow him to go and participate. Through Dr. Potts, MIT's NewDigs program got access to industry people to actually shape the conversation. There were lots of conversations at NewDig level where they were talking about the high cost and then spreading that over time. And so they wanted insurance companies, they wanted actuaries there, they wanted management companies like Interlink there, the manufacturers were at the table, and so were the hospitals. But their approach is still continuing forward, is to understand how gene therapy products are priced, explore models where costs might be spread over different insurance companies over the drug benefit time. And that's an interesting concept, is the drug benefit time, because some drugs they may say in like hemophilia, it's like there's like a warranty for like 7 years. And like, how do you take costs that would have occurred over 7 years, realized in 1 year, but spread them back across? They were having those types of conversations. And of course, me, I've been in the industry for a very long time. It's like, that's not the way that insurance works. And I still think there's a disconnect between some of the things that they were hypothesizing and wanting to do and really what's available with today. They were trying to understand the concept of warranties, and that's new to healthcare, is a warranty that something works. But I'm going to kind of explain a little bit more about how the warranty discussion got started. So I know New Digs is continuing. I saw a picture of Dr. Potts participating on a panel, and it was by contract strategies, and it was at some universities. So that project continues. Next slide. Now, as a reinsurer or a health plan, you really got two choices, like you've always had two choices with Interlink. I mean, we operate under the name of Interlink COE networks and programs. And a network is we have a network that you can access at contracted rates that you can call and get access to. And then we also have programs, and programs always come with benefit plan language and matching centers of excellence networks. So, as a reinsurer, you're going to have two choices, and choice number one is probably the easiest for everybody to do, and that is single case cell and gene therapy approach. In other words, you work on the communication with your clients, and you try to get as early notification as possible. And a lot of times in reinsurance contracts, it requires notice of high cost procedures. And this is something that when I was in the SIA conference in Minneapolis and looking around, I could see concern on a lot of our reinsurance carrier clients' faces as they have to start now improving these communication pipelines to make sure that you get involved as early as possible. But when you take a look at Interlink for an example, CAR-T was big 5 or 6 years ago. We have 30 centers with case rates available for cellular type transplants. You can go on to our website. You can view this 24/7. Negotiations, you could send us cases for new things that you don't know. I'm sure that would happen with all of our other providers. You can request CMO authorizations. And if you wonder if this patient meets the criteria for that, you can get that through Interlink and through probably your other providers. And they would have an IMR service that would be connected to it. Now, there's going to be warranties for some of this stuff, and that would have to be documented in a memorandum of understanding that details the rates, terms, and the warranty that's available. And your specialty nurse that's going to manage this thing may have to manage things for over 5 to 7 years. Now, the other options and choices that you have, and I always look for opportunity, even when things don't seem like opportunities, but Interlink does a lot of business with captives. Captives are attracting the type of clients that a lot of people on this line would like, is that they're forward thinking, they're looking for benefit solutions. And one of the things that as a reinsurer you can do to attract and retain some of these clients is to give them access to benefit plan language and tools for them to actually insert and manage their costs. So if you were put in a benefit-driven type of cell and gene solution, it would require authorization for all gene and cell therapies. As a reinsurer, you could almost get day one notification of a new gene and cell therapy coming in. You would get CMO oversight in all of your cases. It would come with a fully integrated IMR service. It would have benefit plan language requiring MOU creation prior to authorization and treatment, because that would the rate would be part of the authorization process, and a benefit reduction if an MOU is not created. And so, obviously benefit plan language is very helpful. I think that we're going to be looking at, well, how would we possibly get in benefit plan language for something that is so rare as gene therapies? Well, we've got some ideas about how that might happen. Next slide. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about gene therapy pricing fundamentals. And as a negotiator, I like to create my own words, and you're going to see words like avoided cost. These are not necessarily words by others, but gene therapy pricing, it's not, and I should take that back, because you have ex vivo and in vivo. Ex vivo is more classically priced, but generally has very little to do with development, production, distribution, or application. The basic premise on gene therapy pricing is, and this is a quotation off of something that I read, it was, payers are being asked to pay a large price today versus repeatedly paying for treatments that may be taken at regular intervals for months, years, decades, or a lifetime. In other words, if the drug benefit lasts for 7 years, then they're going to be looking and adding in all of the costs that would have occurred over that 7 years. And these are called, in my terms, avoided costs. So what they're doing is saying, okay, you can take all these avoided costs that you would have paid over 7 years and then put it into today's cost. But it also has other elements to it. So it's avoided costs plus life improvement. So the pricing model sums up the cost of avoided care for routine treatment costs, hospitalizations, doctor visits over the duration of the drug benefit. And then they add in quality of life benefits are added in, and the total is discounts, which kind of becomes how they're pricing it. You know, everybody's different, but in summary, that's kind of how that works. Hence the need for a warranty, because this pricing model only holds up if the avoided costs are actually avoided. Because you could say, we're going to pay $3.5 million today to eliminate 7 years of hemophilia, costs and bleeds and those costs that come with that. But if it only lasts for 1 year and then the same problem comes up, that's what the premise of the warranty is. In a pricing model based on avoided costs, the high price is only supported when those costs are actually avoided. So that means that warranties will vary in amounts, duration, and you're going to have to come up. The market is going to have to come up with some sort of milestones achievements. Like you hear that if it goes for 7 years, then it's this. If I think that in CAR-T contracts, at least in Interlinks, it's like a 30-day warranty that it will in fact take effect. Otherwise, you don't pay for it, and it has to be documented. So those are the fundamentals that we're all facing and we're having to work through when we're looking at the price of gene therapy. Next slide, please. So what are the problems with these, if you try to spread it across years, and what are the problems with avoided cost models? Okay, well, the first one is patient migration or patient churn, as they use the word in the insurance world. Here's a fact, is that a member may change employers and health plans at any time. So when you're saying the benefit lasts for 7 years, and that employee could even leave right after it's administered, that becomes a problem in a benefit that goes across 7 years. Who pays and when? If the therapy benefit lasts 7 years, does the plan pay 1/7 on year 1, and this not knowing if the patient will stick around? But I don't think that's the way the pricing model works. It's kind of like, well, we'd like the full payment up front, or this is what it's worth. And so that's a big problem. What does the member manufacturer, who does the manufacturer even charge? If the benefit is for the member and they go uninsured somewhere along the line, what happens to the manufacturer in those instances if they've spread it over 7 years? It's like, well, what if there is no payer? Nobody to charge for that. That's a problem, right? Who oversees the payment and payment return? I mean, somebody's got to coordinate all of that. But even say that, Interlink did it. We were watching this patient. Well, we may have to be calling up, if the patient moves to Cigna or Aetna, somehow letting them know that they have 1/7 of a bill coming to them. And I don't really think that's going to be well received. Now, there have been, the whole time in the discussion, there have been third-party vendors, payment vendors emerging. And these are vendors that are like bankers. And I remember talking to one at the MCRA conference, and he struck up a conversation with me to try to understand what Interlink's approach was going to be. And in their payment model, they're the ones that coordinate all the payment, and it's kind of like a loan. And somebody takes out a loan and it's distributed over time. It seems like it would be complicated, but at least they would have the responsibility of approaching somebody like Cigna or Aetna or somebody else, the next plan, and say, hey, look, you have 1/7 of a payment. Although there hasn't been a lot of chatter about them recently. And at the table where this vendor was talking to me at the MCRA, there was a reinsurer there. And this reinsurer was listening to this guy, this rep kind of pitch me about, well, this is what we can do and stuff like that. And this reinsurer, she listened to him and, he kind of looked over and he said, well, what are your thoughts about this? And she goes, well, I can tell you as a reinsurer, if we knew that somebody had 1/7 of a $3.5 million claim that was payable in the upcoming year through the renewal process, we would laser that case. And everybody at the table just sat still. Nobody knew what to say. And so I think there's some payment problems. So the problem with the payment problems is this has been going on, this conversation for probably 6-7 years now, is that the more likely scenario for us right now is that the plan and the reinsurer at the time of application will probably be the owner of the bill and probably the owner of the warranty. That's just what's known now. And that doesn't mean anything. This is just all, the way that it's playing out. But these are some problems that are significant and hard to overcome. Next slide. So I thought, well, what are some adaptations? What are some of the things that are occurring now? Well, it's becoming pretty apparent that there's probably should be one company that develops the criteria for authorizations, talks to the patient, develops a patient for their over the time. So one company should probably manage this whole time. MOU and warranty preparing and documentation will be really vitally important, particularly on in vivo type of procedures. Gene therapy and contracting part, I think the ex vivo will be very easy to handle. It'll be handled very much like cellular contracts are right now, where the hospital takes the lead. In vivo can happen anywhere, so it's going to be very complicated. And then lastly, here's an adaptation that I think might come up, is a carve-out might emerge for gene and cell therapies. And although I think this is really risky, I've seen carve-outs come off and come and go over my long career in healthcare. And but I think that you may see something like that emerge. Next slide, please. Contract strategy. It really varies whether it's going to be ex vivo or in vivo. There is an in vivo gene therapy in a rare skin condition. I price it like $650,000 a year, which is a cream applied to open sores in the doctor's office as they occur. How do we get ahead of that and contract for that? That's complicated. Negotiations, warranty, care manager are much different than for those procedures that require cell programming outside the body, and then a bone marrow type of procedures at centers of excellence after reinfusion. So really, we have to break this into contract strategies for ex vivo gene therapies that involves removing cells from the body, modifying them, and then placing back into the body. And then in vivo gene therapy, where new genes are inserted directly into the body. And so you're going to see contract strategies that vary by both. So next slide, please. Now, CAR-T, I remember going to a conference probably 5 years ago. It was before COVID. And the big buzz at this conference, it was an MCRA conference for reinsurers for health plans. And it was projected and commented that technology, if it became frontline therapies, could have an increase per member premiums of $50 per month, per member per month. And these procedures were like 1.2 million. And so obviously when that happened, companies like INTERLINK and probably other companies that do network type of stuff started contracting for these types of procedures at centers of excellence whenever we could get that. And so we have 30, in our networks they've been in place for 5 or 6 years now. And here's some of the characteristics of what you would see. 100% of INTERLINK contracts have negotiated drug costs limited to 110% from invoice or wholesale acquisition cost, with 53% of those made up with no markup allowed whatsoever. Just whatever they paid for at invoice costs, that's what you pay for it. Now, do we think that this will continue in the future? We're not exactly sure if that would, because I think at the time, hospitals were thinking they were going to make an enormous amount of money doing the bone marrow transplants and managing complications of those things as they occurred. But the reality of it is that is not so. 87% of INTERLINK CAR-T contracts will offer a rebate or reimbursement of a warranty of some sort if it doesn't work. That's consistent with how you would contract for ex vivos. And 100% of CAR-T procedures that have been completed by INTERLINK were less than 750,000, with most less than or equal to 500,000. So ex vivo contracts, easy to deal with. As these things come up, Chris Atkins will be stimulating the contracting department to add these different procedures into the centers of excellence contracts, because as long as they're going to require a bone marrow type of procedure, the hospital will take the lead role in ordering the drugs and biologics and cell manipulations, and the way that networks will control that would be controlling what the markup would be. Next slide, please. And this is just kind of a more in-depth version of this, and what I just said is that what we're going to be doing is working along with the manufacturers, because one of the things the manufacturers will say is that if you're in a warranty situation where you're asking a lot of money for the product that you are offering, is that you're going to want to make sure that those that are doing the procedure are trained and for actually how to apply or do the particular product. And so there will be some marrying between centers of excellence providers like INTERLINK and the manufacturer. We may have a narrowed network just to do a particular type of procedure. So the first thing to do is identify those centers where we think that, and they feel as though they'll get the best application. We'll negotiate cell and manipulation costs at the time when we go through with this new drug. I think each and every drug will come with their own costs. And so we'd like to understand that and make sure that that's documented in our contract rate summaries. You negotiate hospital and physician. Sometimes, these kind of new procedures, they're kind of hesitant to put in case rates. And sometimes we're hesitant to accept case rates because if we don't have enough experience about where billed charges should reside, is that, but if we get to that point, they will eventually kick over to a case rate. And then we'll negotiate warranty provisions back for the plan. And that'll have to be done probably through the hospital and to the manufacturer. Chris will probably be overseeing that kind of warranty, because a lot of this stuff, she'll be following these things as they come through clinical trials and through the FDA process, is that a lot of those warranties will be documented in there, applications and warranties. Next slide, please. This is just a sample INTERLINK contract rate summary. If you went up online, it kind of looks like a transplant centers of excellence type of contract, but there would be provisions for drug manipulations, how it would be paid, that would be on there. Hospital and physician costs would be on there. And then any kind of warranty duration and provision would also show up on a contract rate summary. And this is how you're going to see them for anything ex vivo that's done at a hospital. And so you can see these today. You could go up online and this is just a copy of something that you would see. Next slide, please. In vivo care. This is a negotiator's nightmare, right? You got high cost, can be applied in many different ways. You got a single provider often and a wanting patient. If you ever been in a negotiating position, this is not a great position to be into. And so our advice is work with your plans to get benefit plan language inserted. It's just going to be essential. And some of the things that you could be doing to get you there would be in the plan document, make sure that there is a pre-treatment review provision in there that requires the physician, the ordering physician, irregardless of setting. It'll be more like any gene therapies would require a special pre-treatment review process. You'd have to have its own authorization process, because this is not something that a nurse is gonna, a regular URUM nurse is gonna be able to pull up and just say, these are the indications and this is what it is. All of these authorizations are gonna have to be custom designed. And yeah, I was talking with Chris the other day, and this is something that we INTERLINK will be providing. We'll be watching these cases come through the FDA process, and when it gets to that point, we would be able to document who it's applicable for, and what are the conditions in which this could be applied. And then lastly, you'd need to have a rate agreement requirement. And I think if you get the appropriate language put in there, and we've got some drafts that are ready, for legal review, and we use outside vendors for legal review, but it should have language that requires a memorandum of understanding, documenting the rate and the warranty, and include that as part of the authorization process. It just has to be included. You get a transplant, you could maybe use this somewhat analogous to that. There's the medical need, and then there's the financial qualification that transplant centers offer. Same type of authorization process should be put in spot for something like cell and gene therapy. Next slide, please. And then comes the question, well, how do you get language like that inserted? You'd be going to a plan and saying, hey, look, as a reinsurer, as a plan advisor, as a TPA leader, and saying, hey, look, there's some very high costs coming our direction. There is a tsunami of high cost, gene and cell therapies coming our way, and we need to get that language changed. Well, it's so rare. The incidence, if it's so low and so rare, is how does the cost justify to get that in there? And so what INTERLINK's approach is going to be is that we are in the process, and we are so joyed and thrilled to have Chris join our team. She was one of the primary architects of the cancer care program to help lead us through creation of what we call the Symphony Benefit Solution. And what it is it builds off of the platform of the cancer care program. The cancer care program has systems, we have nurse training, we have the ability to hire nurses, we've got all of the tools to manage patients all the way through the authorization process. So the idea behind Symphony is that it includes all four of these programs all together. All of them are pre-treatment review. So if you look at it and you say, well, hey, look, I'm a TPA and I want to come up with a competitive advantage. I'd like to offer my clients solutions. Well, this could be incorporated into your TPA administrative bundle. This could be offered as a reinsurance carrier to say, hey, look, let's work together. Because people discount for the cancer care program all the time. They'll say, we'll give 3, 5, 7% discount if you'll put in the cancer care program. Well, in this instance, you would be getting benefit plan language, pre-treatment review with authorizations for all four of these particular programs. So that's kind of our concept about how we get cellular and gene therapies. It's part of a larger package. And I think that's the only way that we can, that's our optimal approach that we have for that. So next slide, please. So that's the conclusion of our presentation to our premier clients today. The information that we presented to you is the information that Oscar and I can find and summarized for you today about the many changes that are occurring inside of our industry. And we have Chris on the line today, and I'd just like Chris to introduce herself for a second and just give a few words about her direction. She will be leading INTERLINK through this. This is a significant investment for INTERLINK to bring in somebody the caliber of Chris to actually lead us through this. And so, Chris, why don't you say a few words, and then we'll take some questions.
You're muted, Chris.
It would help if I turned on my microphone, huh? Hi, I am really excited to rejoin INTERLINK, and I'm committed to building the program and a team that will address the concerns for this costly but innovative and exciting new field. We've already been looking at the approval pipeline through Q1 of 2027. We plan to follow members potentially for years throughout their warranty period. We plan to review each therapy as they're approved and develop evidence-based guidelines to limit off-label usage. So as John and Oscar both said, this is not a field where you want to have a generalist case management program to review and approve these novel but costly treatments. It's going to take a specialized team who are knowledgeable and well-trained to ensure appropriate usage. And in addition, you want to ensure contracting is in place to ensure the best pricing. And INTERLINK is already known as a leader in the industry in creating networks and access through expert contracting. So we're already working on contracting strategies, and we plan to expand this program as more therapies are approved. So I look forward to working with everyone as questions or concerns arise. Please feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much, Chris and John and Dr. Bronster. We do want to go ahead and open it up for questions. So please, if you have any questions, go ahead and type them in now. One question that came in is, does CRISPR gene editing offer a pathway to faster approvals and lower costs?
I think it's unclear. It is a novel approach. Not clear which diseases will be amenable to CRISPR approaches and which diseases will not. I do not anticipate, because the CRISPR technology now utilizes this ex vivo approach. You have to extract cells from the patient, manipulate them, and then reinfuse them. I think this is going to continue to be among the most expensive overall, between the preparation of the product and then the hospitalization, the most expensive gene therapy products in the market, Amanda.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Another question that came in is, who sets the parameters for the warranties? Is it the manufacturer or the payer, or maybe both?
Oh boy, you know, that there's a lot to be discovered in that area, but I'm assuming it would be the manufacturer that would be the lead developer for that. And the reason I say that is that to get to the pricing the way that it's kind of scheduled to work is they're taking all these costs for a period of time backwards, and it's got to be reasonable. You can't say, well, a lifetime. So 5, 7 years, or there'll be the ones that'll be setting the time. It would be companies like INTERLINK and Chris and Oscar that would be looking and helping define the medical milestones, and coming to an agreement about what constitutes a failure at what time. And I think so. And then the negotiators would come in and negotiate, how much goes back and how that would work. So it's probably how that will work.
All right, wonderful.
So,
we do have a reinsurer. Oh, go ahead.
Amanda, let me just address that for a second. So the largest indication, or potentially the largest indication right now that we're seeing coming into the clinic, is sickle cell disease gene therapy. Well, interestingly, we hope by January 1 of this coming year that there will actually be 2 distinct gene therapy products available to treat sickle cell disease. One being introduced by Bluebird Bio, and the other being introduced by a giant in pharma, Vertex Pharmaceuticals. Now, Vertex is using CRISPR technology. Bluebird is using more traditional gene therapy with a viral vector. But we're going to have to see how these different products are priced and what warranties or guarantees these companies are going to offer to try to achieve a competitive advantage. Getting away from what John said is your worst negotiating strategy, one provider of a product that has patients desperately in need of treatment. But I think the market's going to determine to some extent what these warranty looks like. Some of the companies in the field have said under no circumstance are they going to issue a warranty. Others like Bluebird, which already has two gene therapy drugs in the market, build in a warranty into their price model. So it's still very open how this is going to evolve, what John was saying, but I think most of these products will have to have some warranty attached to them, given that they're all going to cost $2, $3, $4 million.
Right.
Great. We're at the hour, but I did want to ask one last question, and this was asked by one of our reinsurers on the line, is who would Interlink target for the Symphony program?
Well, obviously, I mean, if a reinsurer could get really good benefit plan language and pre-treatment review put on dialysis, end-stage renal disease, transplants, cancer, cell and gene therapies, it's a winning formula for those people. And reinsurers have been always very supportive for the cancer care program. So obviously we would go to reinsurers and MGUs, and then we would probably look at large, consultants for large health plans. Large employers would be great. Captives would be very interested in this type of a product, a fully integrated approach. As captives, there's a lot of these captives now where the captive layer is up to over $1 million now. And so a lot of these captives would be very interested in getting this language put in. So that's probably where we would go first with Symphony.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we are at our time, so I just want to mention that if anyone has any questions relating to this webinar or future education webinars, please reach out to us at education.opportunities@interlinkhealth.com. We thank you again for your time today, and we thank our panel of experts.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you.
Thank you.